So welcome everyone to the Association for Social Economics webinar podcast series. Throughout the series, we will explore the profound and multifaceted impact of economics. This podcast series is sponsored by the ASE, whose mission is to foster research and publication centered on the reciprocal relationship between economics and the broader questions of human dignity, ethical values, and social philosophy. Each month, I get a chance to sit down and interview scholars in the field. I am your host, Iris Booter, and with me today, I have Dr. Thomas Lambert, Assistant Professor of Practice at the University of Louisville. Dr. Lambert holds a BA in Political Science and an MBA from the University of Louisville, a Master of Science in Economics from the University of Kentucky, and a PhD in Urban and Public Affairs from the University of Louisville, with a concentration in local economic development. Currently, Dr. Lambert is an assistant professor term and an applied economist with the College of Business at the University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. Dr. Lambert holds a joint appointment with the Economics and Equine Administration Department at Louisville, teaching courses primarily in economics, business statistics, and administration.
Or equine.
Equine, okay. I was gonna say German is my first language, so for that. Dr. Lambert, mostly focuses on research on the business of horse racing and gambling in general. Horse racing is a signature industry of Kentucky. As such, their program receives funding to monitor the industry. Before the University of Louisville, Dr. Lambert taught public policy and public administration for the Masters of Public Administration program at Northern Kentucky University for 5 years. Dr. Lambert has also taught business and economics courses for the Indiana University system. So thank you so much, Thomas, for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Very welcome. And thank you for having me.
And so while we got a brief glimpse into your background with our biography just now, could you talk a little more about what motivated you to get into the field of economics?
Well, when I was younger, I was often interested in political topics, elections here in the United States, state, federal, local, etc. But really kind of struggled with some of the economic issues that were being brought up. Regulation, supply side economic. So if we cut taxes, then rising tide lifts all boats. And I'm like, okay, I really don't understand this. I'd like to learn more. So that kind of got me into it during my studies, undergrad and grad, to looking more closer at different issues and trying to understand them better. I had a lot of economics as an undergraduate student, but tried to, peel back, I guess, some of the layers of discussion that was going on in political rhetoric, the news media. And so that's basically what got me interested, I believe.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It seems like a lot of us have like this, like not direct path towards economics, but like an indirect path, like it's always in the back of our head. But it seems that way for a lot of folks that we just have this indirect path. So very cool. So could you tell our listeners about how you got involved specifically with the ASE organization?
Well, that was kind of indirect as well. I was January of 2022, I kept seeing all these and reading all these news reports about the Great Resignation. I was teaching two sections of a macroeconomics course, discussed this with the students, trying to get a better sense of why this was going on. There was a PBS report and other news media reports. So I began working on this, and then I saw a call for papers from the Forum for Social Economy, which is part of ASE. John Komlos was going to be the guest editor, and I had been doing some calculations, an abstract and a short paper, because I was sitting down to do the empirical work. So I wrote him, I said, well, would this be of interest to you? Because the main topic of it was a special issue of ASE coming up, and John was going to be the guest editor. I said, this is more about resignation and people quitting jobs, much more so than unemployment and underemployment, even though it's related. Would you be interested? And he said, yes, definitely. So I went ahead and started working on the paper with that in mind, submitted it, got the reviews back. It was published January of last year, about this time last year, I guess, published online. And I knew that ASE was, or the Forum for Social Economy was affiliated with ASE, but had no thoughts about joining or getting involved, didn't know that much about the organization until I went to San Antonio a few weeks ago for the American Economics Association and was invited to the breakfast and was given the award. And I said, sign me up, I'll join. And I kind of knew that it was a heterodox group, but I didn't know that much about it. I'm glad it's a heterodox group. So that was another incentive for joining it.
Yeah. So I've noted from your biography that you are a part of a number of professional organizations for heterodox economics in particular. So in your opinion, how can being part of economic associations aid in the development of a more pluralistic approach to economic education?
Well, I think it's very important. In fact, I would not have known about heterodox economics or even the groups unless I had some interaction with some professors I had in the past, whether professors of economic thought or urban economics. Uh, One of my mentors emphasized the different schools of thought, even though he was a mainstream economist, in his economic thought course at the University of Kentucky, Richard Gift. So I was exposed that way. Otherwise, I would not have heard of people like Thorstein Veblen. I already knew about Karl Marx, but some of the other John Commons, et cetera. And then in the PhD program, Peter Meyer was one of the founders of the Union for Radical Political Economists. He was one of the original members of AFE, and I was exposed to even more heterodox economics back then. And I think it's important. I remember when I was in many of my grad school economics courses, I remember thinking, well, this is all very good, but it's more like a mathematics program. And I have nothing against math. I enjoy math, but I was looking for more policy applications, more real world applications, rather than things like talking about strong axiom of revealed preferences versus general axiom of things like that. So, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it seemed very abstract to me. So I see heterodox economics as my own personal opinion, more applied, more real world, more wanting to look at broader issues, broader perspectives. And I think there are valid points to be made that mainstream economics often does not recognize or minimizes the role, for instance, of things like colonialism, imperialism, or for that matter, labor market segmentation, which was part of my paper. I mean, it's mostly the heterodox economists have written about the labor market segmentation. The mainstream folks have kind of minimized it or not devoted as much time to it. So I think it's more realistic, and I think heterodox economics is needed as a juxtaposition to mainstream thinking, if you want to put it this way, maybe keeps mainstream economists honest, so to speak. And I don't know, in heterodox economics, there's a great debate. Well, we need our own set of theories. We need to somehow distinguish ourselves from mainstream economics rather than being a hodgepodge of different schools of thoughts. I don't foresee that as a problem. I think being able to critique mainstream economics is an important enough of a role of heterodox economics and try to keep econ in general, quote, more honest or more realistic. That's the way I see it. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think that's a very interesting perspective. And we're going to really dive into your research in just a little bit. But one of the things I wanted to discuss was basically the idea of how do labor market dynamics, as you mentioned, one of the things that heterodox econ does is really look at more of the segmentation. But so how do labor market dynamics interact with social economic factors, and what really insights could be gained from understanding that intersection for policymakers and businesses?
Well, I think in the paper tried to point this out. Labor market segmentation gets at the roots of gender discrimination, racial discrimination, putting up barriers to certain groups, making it difficult in many cases for child rearing. It flags the problem of child care, the lack of child care that we have here in the United States, the lack of pre-K, which would help with the child care issue. I think one of the things that the paper discussed was all from decades, female labor force participation was going up. It's receded within the last couple of years. And one of the things you keep hearing is the high cost of childcare. And, one of the things the paper pointed out was that the high rate of resignation uh, in many sectors of the economy, particularly the lower paying industries, had to do with the fact that folks were constantly having to look for something with better benefits, not just better pay, but hopefully childcare or medical care where they could take days off if they were sick. If you didn't have this, you were less likely to call in sick, be absent, etc., even though the job was low paid because you couldn't afford to take off from work. So I think in trying to build a better economy, I think the article kind of flags certain issues, the need for, and this relates to social economics, I suppose, pre-K, better training, and even in these industries which have high turnover rates like hotels, fast food places, cleaning services, lawn care, etc. There would be some gains if you could increase the pay and give more benefits versus continuing to have the same high turnover rates, which is a cost to many industries as well.
Absolutely. And so we'll be diving into that paper, which I read it. I thought it was fascinating. But before we do that, can you describe the general areas of economics that your research concentrates on and really what motivates you to be involved in those particular areas?
Well, over the last couple of years, besides the Great Resignation paper, I've done a lot within economic history, the transition from feudalism to capitalism, because there are a lot of recent data sets have come out over the years, and I've even created some data sets myself using conjectures, estimates, etc. That's one area on which I concentrate because I find perhaps there are lessons learned about our current state of capitalism regarding the future. I've looked at long wave cycles as far as economic development of the United States over time and how that plays out politically. I think we're at the end of a long wave cycle now, or at the beginning of a new one, where artificial intelligence, changes in energy consumption and usage are going to be part of a pattern of the next long wave. I've also done a lot of research in urban economics, particularly urban sprawl and how it affects certain public services. And this brings up another reason why I tend to focus on heterodox economics. I never will forget the fact that using a model, you could predict that the more sprawled a metro area was, or even a county or a city, the longer it would take for an emergency vehicle, emergency medical or fire truck, it would take longer for them to get to a particular location than if the area was more densely settled and less sprawl. Submitted that to a mainstream journal, and they absolutely despised it. They said, well, we know that's impossible in free markets, and that, there is no such thing as urban sprawl. Communities building outward is the natural evolution of human habitation. I'll never forget that quote. I sent it to a heterodox journal, and they were like, well, yeah, urban sprawl, worse in some areas than others, but it has to exist because you have leapfrog development, vacant space between neighborhoods. It doesn't make any sense. It costs more to put in roads, et cetera. So I think there's a more realistic understanding, again, getting back to heterodox and social economics, of where we stand versus some of the mainstream journals and thinking that is more abstract and, oh, free markets have to work. Everyone is completely rational. You've heard this before, I'm sure, but I guess that's the angle at which I approach things, that perhaps things aren't so obvious if you try to use the mainstream way of thinking. So
I'm kind of flabbergasted that you got that feedback. With
yes,
regards to
I remember
that,
that comment.
wow. I'm actually kind of speechless at that point for that. I'm like,
Urban sprawl doesn't exist. That
it
was
doesn't exist. I live in Salt Lake, and like you can clearly see, I mean, there's only so much space, especially now, growing population, right? There's only so much space. Like you have like, anyways, you have to go out. So wow, interesting to say the least. So, whew, one big congratulations, I will say, on being awarded with the Welch Award at this year's, as you mentioned, ASSA meeting for your work titled The Great Resignation in the United States, a study of labor market segmentation. We will be sure to link that paper in our show notes. For those who are unaware, this award, the Welch Award, is the Patrick J. Welch Award for the best paper published in the Forum for Social Economics and was established by the ASE Executive Council in 2012 and named for Patrick J. Welch, editor of the journal from 1995 to 2006. So from your work, what are the main factors that contributed to the Great Resignation in the United States since the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, actually, before COVID-19, resignation rates in all industries were trending upward. They had always been high in the major sectors of, and of course, NAICS, the North American Industrial Classification System, they tweaked things over the last 26 years as far as how they classify different businesses. I mean, fast foods used to be in retailing, now it's accommodation, food services, et cetera. But speaking of accommodation, food services, as well as things in the classification of arts, entertainment, et cetera, those have always had high resignation rates. Mm-hmm. And you can make the argument that many of those positions are entry-level jobs for younger people, and they're just waiting to get out of school or training or what have you. And for, a good deal, but well, for a certain portion of the population, however, it is a permanent job. If you have a high school diploma and that's it, or maybe less, you're kind of going to stay within those industries. And people usually, not always, but tend to stay within the same industry over most of their career. Not always, but quite often, particularly the lesser education you have, the more limitations. But actually that had been trending up quite a bit since 2004, 2005, even before the Great Recession, stayed high, and then really went through the roof during COVID. And again, you've had certain industries where this pattern was shown, although manufacturing and a few other industries, it went up, but not as high as some of these lower paid, these industries where you have lower paid occupations and lower paid people. So the thing with COVID, I think it just accelerated the trend. And of course, the mainstream economists will tell you, well, the problem is you have the retirement of the baby boomers, you have younger people staying in school longer. Okay, but what about people with children? What about different minority groups? What about females? What about union versus non-union participation? Union jobs typically have more stability. The government jobs, basically, I mean, the resignation rates went up slightly, but not that much. Main reason is because of a great deal of unionization among a lot of government work. It's not the best paying work, but then again, it's not very low paying work. There's a lot of job stability. But I think a lot of the churning was because of the fact that folks out there, it becomes with the high cost of medicine, medical care, child care, et cetera. And the news media reports were somewhat correct on, they were correct on this fact. I think that you've got a lot of people searching around trying to find something regarding job stability instead of itinerant work. Benefits, medical benefits, retirement benefits as far as childcare, and they weren't finding that. And so this churning kept going on and on finally stops, I guess, and this is after the paper with the Federal Reserve raising interest rates and just the job market slowing down quite a bit. Um, Construction, a lot of other occupations, I think some people didn't feel safe in going back to work.
Mhm.
Also, in a lot of these businesses, particularly the smaller ones, a lot of them really didn't recover from the lockdown. Many restaurants where these people tended to work, hotels, et cetera, service type work, never really recovered from the pandemic. Many of them shut down, many of them closed. So I think the need to find better working conditions during and after COVID accelerated the pace of the quit rate as well as the job opening rate as well.
Mm.
So, and then some folks just choosing to drop out of the labor force altogether, and not necessarily because they were younger trying to finish school or because of retirement or anything like that. I think, there was a significant number of people who just decided to stay out of the labor force, to
Mhm.
look after kids, look after older parents, and to try to find some job with benefits and better pay.
Mhm. Yeah. So you touched on this already, but from your work, which industries really experience that higher quit rates than the national average? And then are there any unique problems that those particular industries faced?
Well, yeah, accommodation, food services, arts, entertainment, more, I mean, not Hollywood type work, but more itinerant work at recreational parks like Disney World, seasonal type things, work at parks, etc. And
Mm.
then also retailing was high as well. And I forgot to mention one thing idiosyncratic about many of these jobs is that in industries in general is that they have a wide span of management. So a supervisor, a manager can have a large number of people to oversee. Well, there are a couple of problems with this. I almost forgot about this. Um, you have poor management, not by design, but by default, because you're not able to sit down and talk to your workers, train them, try to help them to improve. A lot of workers get discouraged about that. They quit, they move on. Or you have a boss who's overworked, who's trying to control everything he or she possibly can. So what happens? You get a negative work environment. If they're stressed, they're they're quote cracking the proverbial whip or what have you, being strict. And so a lot of these more poorly managed, and this is along the lines of how intense is the management of a business. I think when you have poor management, wide span of management, or in many of these industries, you have people punching a clock, logging into a computer, they're being monitored with a camera, or they, live, breathe, and die by patient evaluations. If you're working at the front desk of a hospital or what have you, or you're working at a call center, you live and die by these ratings, which may or may not be accurate. And so this leads to a lot of frustration. And whether the person is somebody in college or whether there's somebody about to retire, it doesn't make any difference. They're going to get tired of the job anyway, quit or make plans to quit, start shopping around for the next place. So they hope they can find a better system of management. The industries with the greatest, or excuse me, the lowest level of turnover and the quit rates were the ones, believe it or not, who had the greatest number of managers as a
Mhm.
portion of the workforce, higher pay, more stability, and those tended to be your large corporations who were in oligopolistic markets.
Mhm.
The others, like food services and things like that, were in more competitive environments where there's a lot more pressure from the boss, to make the money, to make the revenues, go up against the competition. You're under more consumer pressure, whereas in these other organizations, finance, et cetera, you have more of a professional class. And you would think, well, the more bosses, the more oppressive something can be. Well, sometimes people have titles that put them in management, but they really don't manage anybody, correct? An accountant perhaps may work independently going over the books and yet be paid very well and may only have one person with whom he or she works under him or her.
Mhm.
So I thought that was interesting as well.
Mhm.
These competitive industries are under a lot of pressure, and that's also where you see a lot of the turnover. And I think that's regardless of someone's age or demographic.
Mhm. No, that's very interesting because I hadn't thought about this. I do labor as well, but I hadn't thought about tearing it out by the industry structure. So I thought that was a very unique point that you brought in to your research.
Yeah, and then of course more and more, as you probably know, Iris, people if they work from home, I mean that's good, but some are saying, well, that's a liberating effect. Their bosses, however, want them to start coming back to the workplace, if for no other reason, just to watch them, which doesn't make any sense. But
Mhm.
we're also seeing more and more places of employment, again, where you've got to log in at a certain time, you've got to have so much screen time or whatever internet usage show that you're active, et cetera, which, is another way of trying to control and monitor an employee. And I think if you look at the literature, particularly the heterodox literature, most people take umbrage to that.
Mhm.
They don't, even in the past, they never really like punching a clock, which has gone by the wayside by now, I imagine, at most places, but still something that folks didn't like in the past. And now they're not liking this monitoring cameras and all of this other stuff, I suppose.
And I
Pretty
think
sure.
that leads us into also our next question here, because with the changes of, we work from home and now we're kind of being driven back into working from the office, where, a lot of studies say you're just as productive or even more productive, right? Working from home. And of course it depends on the sector that you're working with, right? We can't have, work from home jobs in certain
Right.
industries, of course. But are factors such as healthcare and childcare still important issues with the job turnover? And then going back into the workforce or workplace now.
Right. Right. Of course, I think the paper did mention that the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics data indicated that only about 25% of the people out there can have the luxury of working from
Mhm.
home. Most jobs, you still can't do that. Of course, many employers are trying to sweeten things for employees by saying, well, you work from home a couple of days a week. Although the polls keep showing that they want them in the office, they want right there. And a lot of big city mayors are becoming frustrated. They look around and see these landlords complaining, our office towers, we only got half the capacity being rented now, or maybe
Mhm.
at the most 80%, and that's going to maybe lead to a financial crisis in commercial real estate. I don't know. But there's this, as you know, there's this tension, work from home, work, stay at work at your workplace. Um, but a lot of the people, getting back to the paper, who were constantly going from looking for another job or resigning, looking for another one, even if they had nothing in hand, they didn't have that luxury usually. So I think for them that would be a nice luxury, but you can't do that. I mean, how can you serve customers, as you know, at a fast food place at a distance?
Mhm.
Well, you can't do it. But anyway, yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. So do you think so you briefly mentioned the news media portrayal. So do you think the news media portrayals of the Great Resignation were or have been entirely accurate?
That's a good question, because in some of the literature I read, some of the stuff I saw on TV, you would think that, oh, these are high-tech people with advanced degrees, they're computer whizzes or some type of technology whiz who are freelancing, going out on their own, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the numbers really didn't show that. Perhaps you did have people in those lines of work, but that, from what I could see, it was mostly anecdotal.
Mhm.
It was people in the lower level occupations, the more competitive industries, who were driving most of the churning. Of course, it had always been there.
Mhm.
And when you look at the industry unemployment rate as a portion of the national unemployment rate, certain industries, retailing, food services, parks, entertainment, and stuff like that, had always been higher than the national unemployment rate. Many people staying within those industries if they had less education, limited opportunities. And so that had always been there.
Mhm.
And, that got back into the heterodox assumption that we've got competitive sector of the economy for labor markets, and then you have an oligopolized or a monopolized sector. And a monopolized sector is where most folks want to be.
Mhm.
They can charge their customers higher prices. It's more stable. There's less competition. You have less risk of losing a job. On the other hand, you go to work for a fast food place, lawn care service, retailing. It's a lot of part-time work, as you know, not as good. And so, but unfortunately, the competitive sector is made up to disproportionately of minorities, uh, people with less education. So they may not have, probably don't have the same opportunities to transition to this monopolized sector as
Mhm.
other people. So
Yeah, absolutely. Then, turning our attention more to policy. So, in your opinion, how effective are current policies and practices in addressing the challenges posed by high quit rates and persistent unemployment?
I think one answer, and we're not doing very well as a nation in this regard. Some states are doing well, but we need to have some type of universal pre-K program.
Mhm.
I mean, that won't solve the entire child care program, child care problem, but it would probably help dramatically. I think this the talks about expanding the earned income tax credit to take in a greater portion of households. I think that's a good idea. Whether it passes or not is another question. In my state, Kentucky, the governor has proposed, getting back to pre-K, he has proposed, let's have a pre-K program because we're flushed with money now in a
Mhm.
surplus account, a rainy day account, and yet the legislature doesn't want to do it. They don't see the value of it, despite what the research shows as far as educational benefits. And then that would also take care of the labor force problem. We've got 59% labor force participation in my state. We're like six from the bottom.
Mhm.
That's very low. We do have a disproportionate number of people who are sick or disabled compared to other states. But part of the problem is, again, many women deciding to stay home because it doesn't make sense to go get a job and then spend just about all of your pay from that job having your children
Yeah.
watched. So I don't think we're doing enough as far as childcare. I don't think we're doing enough to promote the job stability within these industries that have high turnover rates by having such a low minimum wage.
Mhm.
Um, that doesn't help either. I realize that some employers are paying more than the minimum wage, which is helpful, but some states are keeping their minimum wage at the same rate. Some employers are not going along. So I think from a policy perspective, plus we're not giving enough educational opportunities for people as well. Not like we were in the past when it comes to post-secondary education, vocational training,
Mhm.
job displacement due to foreign trade. That is not fully funded. Pell Grants are not fully funded for people to go back to school. So I think there are some potential resolutions to this job turnover problem as far as the labor force participation problem. You probably know more about that than me, Iris, um, but we don't, as a nation, we don't seem to want to act on these.
Mhm. No, I do think that the labor force participation rates, like they bounced back a little bit, after COVID, but not to where we were pre-COVID.
Right.
And I always joke in my class, like, well, they can't all be TikTokers, right? They can't all be doing this, like, but where are they, right? And I think to your point, is a lot of the gender inequality will come into play with regards to childcare.
Right.
Because I mean, I know colleagues that literally have to decide, well, do I come back to work and spend my entire paycheck on childcare, the daycare services, or do I just stay at home? because of that. So
Right.
absolutely, we're seeing that in practice, and I agree. There could be a lot more done with this.
I thought, and I think the paper mentioned this, my hypothesis, one of my hypotheses was that the greater the presence of females in an industry, and as childcare costs continue to rise, you would see a positive correlation between that and the quit rate in that industry. Well, actually, it was the opposite, which then, upon further reflection, got me thinking, well, if you're female and you have children, you want to be in an industry or an occupation where they're going to give you childcare, better benefits, etc. So you're as many women were drifting towards those industries as possible, particularly as childcare. And if you're not in that situation, you're looking for something that provides those benefits. And if you can't, then it makes sense you drop out. You really have, or keep looking.
Yeah.
You know.
No, it's a great point. And something that I wish we would do more with policy, but I don't, there's not much on the radar for, as far as I can see on the national level for this as of right now. For this
Unfortunately,
type
yes,
of, yeah.
that's true.
Yeah. And as everybody knows from my podcast, I have my standard sign-off question. This has been a fascinating discussion. And if listeners want to like know where to find you, how to follow your research, where could they find some information?
My profile is posted on the College of Business website at the University of Louisville. As you mentioned earlier, I'm in both the equine and the economics department. I'm shared by both. I guess it's kind of rare not only to be a heterodox economist, but also an equine economist. So it's
No, I think that's not, I mean, honestly, I think it's fascinating, even though I can't say the word. But it's actually really, it's really intriguing. So yeah.
Well, it's different. I mean, I study the parimutuel wagering in the state, and not only just the gambling aspects and horse racing, but we also cover all of the different industries within equine, shows, events. Even I've started research on bringing back plow horses for organic farms as part of the solution for climate change, carbon emissions. I don't think it will make that great of a dent, but maybe it could help. But the other place where you can find me, host a weekly podcast, broadcast on radio here in my hometown, Louisville. It's on forwardradio.org. The title of the show is Economic Impact. So it's a half-hour broadcast once a week, and then it's also uploaded to SoundCloud. So,
okay. And I gotta ask, do you attend the Kentucky Derby?
I have before in the past. Yes, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of craziness as well. We get people from all over the world, and I mean, we showcase the city, etc. And it's as you noted earlier, equine industries are a signature industry of this state. We have the premier thoroughbred farms in the world, and you know, a stallion here can earn $225,000 for each mare with which it breeds. So for these farm owners, it's good source of revenue. And you know, horse racing has its problems, breeding has its problems, but it's still one of the industries at the state on which it likes to focus. So
absolutely. And we'll definitely link in our show notes your paper as well as your website and some other aspects there too. And then I want to end our discussion with looking forward. And I know it's a difficult question. I'm not saying it's an easy question, but what do you envision the future of social economics looks like?
I think to try to examine questions that will help take us towards solutions of different problems. Maybe I'm being a little bit too optimistic here, but like, for instance, I mean, whether we're talking about urban sprawl or whether we're talking about labor markets or what have you, if social economics, heterodox economics can still keep raising these issues of where markets don't really or haven't come up with solutions, let's say, I think social economics and heterodox economics have served an invaluable purpose. Getting people to listen is kind of hard. And I don't know about you, but I see, continuation of a lot of abstractness in mainstream, although they are coming around to issues of discrimination, race, gender, et cetera, LGBTQ, which is good. But I just wonder if it goes far enough. I still don't see enough of the discussion. I think this is where social economists, heterodox economists, what have you, play a critical role. Keep bringing back up and pointing out the problems with climate change, urban sprawl, these other things which have never been emphasized. Legacy of imperialism, that's another interest of mine now. Slavery, what role did it have? I know this has been talked about a lot in the economics literature, but I don't know if it's really been tackled hard enough, much less by mainstream, but also heterodox economists, mostly more heterodox economists than mainstream. So I think we need to keep raising these issues, and that's what's important. And even if we don't come up with an end-all comprehensive theory of what is heterodox economics, which something about which a lot of people worry, I think it's sufficient and it's valuable for the heterodox community, social economists, et cetera, to keep pointing out what some of these issues, and hopefully we'll get some action.
Absolutely. So
because we have there's normative values in everything.
Yeah.
The mainstream economists don't like to acknowledge that, but there are normative values there, as you know.
And so what you are saying is that urban sprawl does exist and markets can fail.
Right.
just teasing. Like, just kidding.
Right. You're ignoring the external cost, even though you say that there are external costs to things, but you're still ignoring them, or you're not pushing them as much as you should be. So
no, absolutely. And I do like the more, a little more optimism is always a good thing. Usually we think, the dismal science. So it's kind of nice to have a sense of optimism. So
yes.
I don't think my I don't know if I should mention this, but my college may not have been, they looked at me when I was trying to pitch economics. I'm like, it's the dismal science. They're like, can we not say that?
Famous quote from Thomas Malthus, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, thank you so very much for being with us today. It's been a great podcast interview, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very honored, and I hope it's been useful, and pleasure to be with you today, Iris.
Absolutely.